Okay, and so we're getting ready to begin now. And I just want to welcome everybody to What's All This About Objectives with John. And I am so excited to have this program. John has been an informal mentor for me for several years now. I've been following his work and the work of RBT since my last year of leadership school. So I unfortunately came upon this work as I was just exiting teaching and going into leadership. But Studying Skillful Teacher has been a guidebook for me in terms of all of the professional development that I have organized and created. And I think it is just the gold standard in what it means to be a great teacher. And so I'm so delighted that John was willing to offer this time to us today, and Deb Reed too, who's here. Thank you, Deb, for being here. Just so that you know, I'm going to keep everyone's microphones on mute. Please feel free to enter in any questions into the chat, and I will bring them up to John as he takes natural pauses throughout the presentation. We will end about 5 minutes early because this program, this same room is being used for a program afterward. I hope you stick around with us for George Koros. But until then, I'm gonna turn this over without further delay to John. Once again, in the chat are our norms and also my email, which is jlevine@pnwboses.org. You can feel free to email me anytime, especially if what happens here resonates with you and you want to learn more or bring this to your school. Our partners at RBT are always willing to on-site consult or offer workshops at BOCES to be able to support our schools. So I look forward to speaking to all of you if you have questions about the work RBT does and how PNW BOCES can support you in that. So without further ado, I introduce to you John Saphier.
Thank you very much, Jackie. Well, welcome, folks. This is the first of a series of webinars on Tuesday at 1 p.m. that Deb and I are going to do on things pertaining to instruction. And as we go on, perhaps there'll be other topics you'll suggest that we'll bring in too. So what is all the fuss about objectives? For the purposes of our conversations today, we're going to define these words here as synonyms for objectives because there are many other terms that are used these days. We are focusing, however, on the lesson. And one here is alternately goals, learning targets, aims, mastery, objective. The point is that they are, in fact, very, very important. And about them, there are two main points that we want to make. The first one, which is our topic today, is I've got to turn myself upside down before I start the lesson in some way to make sure the kids understand what the objective is. Now, there are a number of other things related to objectives that are important too, like why should I bother learning about it if I'm a kid? And we'll go into those a bit later on. But the first one is a singular focus. Do the students understand what it is? And today I'll introduce the other one too. This is what we'll do in the very next webinar next Tuesday. The other thing about objectives is not only that the kids understand it, but what we're trying to make sure everybody walks out the room with, is the most worthwhile thing to be working on for these kids right now. So that's the, as it were, objective of today, to get number one accomplished. And for me to make sure that I've gotten across all the different ways for kids to understand it and that it's significant enough to do. Now, the articles that talk about this topic focus on different aspects of it. Our own Andy Platt, one of our longtime and well-regarded trainers, invented the term control tower as an analogy. He said that the objective serves as the control tower for two things. It's the control tower for what the students are going to pay attention to. And it's the control tower for me as the instructor. Here are some other analogies of the things that we're doing and the point of all of the activities we come up with. So that introduces us to the notion of making sure that the learning experience aligns with the objective. So if I put that in more concrete language, if the students do the activity, they're going to learn the learning I want them to learn. But just doing the activity isn't enough unless they know what the objective is. And so in addition to alignment, this anchor symbolizes the fact that they also understand the connection between the activity and the learning that's going to happen. Here's another analogy for it. Notice that there are there are waves crashing up on the sea there around the little island that the lighthouse is situated on. The lighthouse doesn't do in the daytime what it can do during the lesson, and that is shine a light on the things that are most important to come away with, kids, pretending I'm talking to a class. And the waves washing up on the shore are all the things that can interfere with that, like I get caught up in the activity and being a good doobie and doing what the teacher asked, or I get caught up in socializing and the other things I'd rather do rather than what the teacher asked me to pay attention to and do. So here's the final picture as an analogy for objectives, and that is a compass. It's guiding me as a teacher to do things like, in the middle of the lesson, stop and go back to the objective, get the attention of all the kids on what we said at the beginning, and ask them how they're doing with meeting it, or what their current assessment is on a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 scale of how much it's coming across and being absorbed, or something else. The short form of that is return to the objective sometime during the course of the lesson to assess how the students are doing it, and whether it's connecting with the things that are in the activity stream and the flow of what we're doing. Now, on this business of students understanding what the objective is, I'm going to show you a video of a teacher who's pretty good at that. And after that, we're going to go into chat rooms, and I'm going to ask you what you noticed in this video his moves were that had something to do with making sure the kids understand what the objective is. So get ready. Here comes the video. This is a 6th grade class, and they are about to begin an immigration unit in which they will make connections between immigration as a process that happens to this country and their own personal backgrounds. So here we go. And once again, the prompt is, what are the moves that he made that have anything to do with getting the kids to understand what the objective is? Now, it's written there on the board. I will freeze frame the video when we go to a close-up of that, just so you can see what was on the board. Now, one of the reasons for doing that is there's been a movement in the country, almost a decade old, that I'm sure you've heard of, and it says, put the objective on the board. All right. Now, I'll tell you, frankly, I don't care if a person puts the objective on the board or not, although it's a good thing to do. What I care about is that the kids understand what it is. So here we go. What are the moves he's making to make sure that the kids understand what the objective is?
We really just have a little bit of knowledge based on our own family's immigration stories. And as we get into our expedition, we'll get into 2 really chunky, long-term case studies. Please take a look at today's workshop target. Give me a thumb if you have a specific notice.
Take a second and read that. I presume it's okay. Print's big enough. I'll read it in case you can't see it well. I can use primary source documents to develop introductory understanding and introduce introductory research questions for our first long-term immigration case study.
Sort of wonder based on just today's workshop target. Let's make sure we understand what this is all about. See a lot of thumbs, a lot of things people are noticing, a lot of things people are wondering. Maddie, start us off. What do you see here?
We're gonna use some documents or some text to notice some notices and wonders about case studies.
Yeah, we'll look at some different texts to create some notices and wonders. What else are you thinking about, Ben? What do you think we're going after here? What questions do you have about today's target?
My question is, what's an immigration case study?
Have that right here. Awesome. Great question, Ben. We'll come back to that in just a bit. Thanks. Andrew, something you're noticing or
I
wondering?
think we're gonna, adding on to Maddie's for the source documents, we're trying to find understanding and research questions.
Good. So specifically, we're trying to develop a bit of understanding today. It's just some introductory understanding, but probably what's even more important is our developing some research questions that will help shape the rest of our investigation, the rest of this expedition in a way. Chase, what else are you seeing or wondering?
We're going to use primary source
Good.
to figure this stuff.
Give me a pinky. You can hold that pinky way down low if you're like, I have no idea about primary research documents or resource documents. Maybe up here if you're like, I have some sense of what those may be. And hold that pinky up high if you're like, primary research documents? Man, it's like I've been working with them since I was born. You know many things about what those are.
Not many, but yeah, not that much.
So I see a real mix within the crew. I'm going to ask you just to take about 10 seconds. Share your understanding. What do we mean by primary resource documents?
Secondary research would be like someone wrote something, or primary is a letter written by someone. Building is not
Is this direction? I love it. Where are we right now with our understanding of primary resource documents? You might even discuss it, how it's different from secondary, if you were able to speak to that. Kilauea, start us off.
That was like the primary document stuff was like the real stuff, I guess, like real information, and like the good,
Can you say a little bit more about what you mean by real?
like things that have been like done and copied and stuff.
So we can sort of say primary are real. Okay. Great. Sienna, something else to add?
Okay, so primary came from that specific person, and like secondary came from somebody else who wasn't actually there to experience it or something. It was just like they know about it. Oh, yeah, that's so that's what usually a secondary means.
Okay. If I went for a run this morning, and I'm jogging, and I see someone on my run, and they're just singing these beautiful songs, right? And I write a newspaper article about it. Would you call that a primary or a secondary? Show me your fingers. Primary or a secondary? I was right there. I saw it. I wrote a newspaper article about it. I see some mixed emotions. Okay, great. Let me ask you this question. If I was right there, I saw that person sing these beautiful songs when I was on my run, and then I told Devin about it. And then Devin wrote a letter to someone about it. Is Devin's letter primary or secondary compared to what I was able to say about it? Now I'm seeing almost unanimous now that Devin is that secondary source. Sid is getting us right on track, and I think Kilauea is as well. I'm going to ask you just to make a quick note in your expedition journals about this, because we'll come back to this information later. Maybe make a little T-chart. Primary, secondary. Both Kilauea and Sienna are right. Primary.
We'll stop it there. Now, I'm going to ask you, Jackie, if you could, to put everybody into a chat room with 3 folks in each chat room. And what I'd like you to do when you get there is first of all, introduce yourself. That is your name and where you are and what you do in your school district. And that should be, about 30 seconds as a go-round. And then I'd like you to discuss that prompt I gave you at the beginning. What are the moves he made in order to would understand what the objective is? So there's multiple moves. There ought to be a little list that you all can create in order to do that. So Jackie, can you do that now and put us into breakout rooms with 3 people in each rooms? And I think we'll stay in those breakout rooms for about 5 minutes, and then we'll call you all back into the classroom, our virtual classroom here.
Thank you, John. And yes, please note that when you are told that the room is closing, it gives you about a minute to wrap up your conversation in that time. So I'm going to go and create those rooms right now, and I'll see you all in a little bit.
How long were we in the breakout rooms, Jackie?
About 3 minutes. I'm not sure if that was long enough. And I realized once I had you in there that I don't think you could move out of the room. So I know you had wanted to go to the different meeting rooms.
Right.
But I think, unfortunately, that doesn't, even co-host doesn't allow it. So I will have to make you the host next time.
Right. Just a little feedback for us folks. Give me a thumbs up if that was the right amount of time, and a thumbs down if you wanted more time in the breakout room. Would you all hold up the hand to your camera now? Thumbs up or thumbs down? Thumbs up means it was about the right amount of time. Thumbs down, you would have liked a longer amount of time. Good. All right. Very good. In my breakout room, Tony mentioned two moves so far. One was that after he read the objective off the board, he put them into table talk groups in order to follow up on your wonders about the objective. In other words, phrasing it that way authorizes them not to quite get it yet. So the vocabulary choice is relevant. And also, it gives him an opportunity to listen around whether their perceptions of the objective are correct or not. And the other thing that you said, Tony, that I heard is he used the pinky signal, and the question that provoked it was, do you understand or not understand the difference between your primary and secondary source? And it was, hold it low, hold it middle, hold it high. That's how you tell us. What are some others? And you could unmute folks for this one, Jackie. What are some other things you noticed that would be on this list of things he did to make sure the kids understood the objective?
Everyone is unmuted, so feel free to chime in.
Yes, sir. Jeff, did you say something?
No, actually I didn't, but I could. I always could say
Go ahead.
something.
You be first.
Well, I will say something now since you probably. I think, and we discussed this a little bit, this notion of not assuming students know. I think sometimes teachers can get into the habit of just covering content without verifying understanding. So the very nature of the fact that he posed the question was a way to assess students' understanding. And I think that's central.
Mm-hmm. Check. Just deciding that you're going to pause, linger, stay for a minute or so after in some way getting the objective out there is the intention, the volition behind doing this. And the more I'm an activity-based person, I want to get on with it, get kids into it, the less likely I'm going to actually pause and linger to do that. What else? How about Marcelo? Do I pronounce your name right?
Morello.
Oh. Anything?
I thought he was very engaging with the kids, and they were pretty much on the same level, and the kids weren't intimidated by him. They were very comfortable expressing themselves.
Check. Now that means that all along, before this moment in the flow of a year, he's made it safe for kids to not know something. And part of that is non-judgmental language. Whatever a kid says, he accepts it. Sometimes, like at the very beginning, when he asks them for their wonders, a kid says, "What's an immigration case study?" Like, what is this whole thing going to be about anyway? And so he says, "Great question," records it on the board, and he knows now that there's some language there he's got to come back to. What other thoughts occur to you? How about Alex? Anything to add to our list?
I think the conversation that Katie, Michelle, and I had was we talked about the teacher's ability to just circulate that helped kind of keep the level of student engagement high. And also there was a point at when the students were discussing and sharing their responses, and there was that moment of perhaps where some may feel uncomfortable with the level of activity and noise and what have you, and rather than I think it speaks to your point about being in a safe learning environment. He allowed that to just kind of, that excitement to kind of develop very organically. And I think that just inspired more students to participate in the process as well.
Check. Alex, is that your school behind you in the background of the picture?
It is, yes, it is. It is Garrison School.
Man, stone construction, ain't that something?
It
What
is.
town-
It is.
What town are you in?
Sorry.
What town are you in?
So the town of Phillipstown, south of Cold Spring.
Well,
Yeah, Alex, I'm right up the road from you. I teach accounting.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Small world.
So I'm very good friends with Pat Beckley. I know Pat Beckley very well.
Oh, that's funny.
Too funny, small world.
Indeed. Let's see, who else do we have on with us here? Tony, we've already got some of yours out. Kelsey, you get to our conversation about what a person does in action to get the kids to understand the objective.
Okay. First of all, I want to clarify myself. This is my daughter's Zoom account. I couldn't get mine up. She's been on webinars as well for her school. So my name is Diana. I work for PNW BOCES in Yorktown. So what I really liked from what I really liked from how the teacher was that he also didn't rush these children through just explaining the objective. He gave me the feel that he would have stayed on that objective until they understood it, or maybe that whole class. And the kids did feel comfortable with that. So that's what I also got from that.
Yeah, right on, Diane. Because of their responses, he actually 5 seconds on the spot. You know, he invented that thing about I'm strolling through the park and I hear this lovely song as a way of separating primary from secondary sources. He didn't plan that. I think you're right when you say he would have spent as long as he took. What would happen if he didn't? Suppose he didn't spend as long as it took to make sure they understood the objective. They're good doobies. They'd go ahead and do the activities. What do you think, folks? Anybody can just blurt.
I think the steps that he took helped to clarify any misunderstandings going into the conversation before he set the students up to do their work. I really also liked how he builds connection within the classroom by having students build upon what each other said. So it creates a nice climate, classroom climate of each other really reinforcing and supporting one another in sharing. So I like that piece of it.
Thank you, Jackie. If he didn't make sure they all understood it, then as a student in a class, when I don't understand what the point of the activities is, my mind wanders. And that's actually sort of a normal and healthy thing to do. And some kids' mind will wander into, looking around and gazing out the window. And some kids' minds will wander into talking to Jackie, who's sitting next to me. And I want to know why she wouldn't sit next to me on the bus coming into school this morning. Come on, Jackie, how come you would? The point is that if the kids don't understand the objective, there's at least 25% or more of any class that will therefore not attend what the learning experiences are. They'll do something else because our kids are creative human beings. So that's sort of the downside if you don't do it. And there are also some kids who not only want to understand what the objective is, but why it would matter. And so the big picture of learning targets or objectives has a lot more in it than the one thing we're talking about today. And I just want to briefly go over those things. There's 12 of them, and ask you to identify the ones that you are most interested in. We'll talk about those a little. Now, number 4 is the one that we have just been addressing by looking at that guy's class. The other one I'm going to save until our next webinar, which is how come that's the objective I picked for today? Do I know for sure it's the most worthwhile learning target for them? Or am I doing it because that's what the pacing guide says ought to be next? Another step that's important in framing an objective is determining whether the kids have enough background knowledge to work on that. Maybe there's a few gaps that have to be filled in first. Now, much of the work on objectives has been about getting the language right. That is not insignificant, but I think that the main reason is so that the kids will have something they can self-assess about. You know, you'll be able to distinguish between the three branches of government and what the powers of each one are. The language has been what entire books and workshops were about. And my point is that it needs to be significantly beyond that. Now, this one is really interesting. In the workshops that Deb and I have done, we have found that converting an objective into student-friendly language is not as easy as it sounds. In our next little webinar here, we will do a little practice of that. You definitely saw the guy we looked at unpacking the objective. Unpacking means stop, pause, linger, and do a variety of things to check to see if they really get it, and then unscramble the confusion if they didn't. It is useful to have the objective posted somewhere in the room so kids can refer back to it, or halfway through the lesson, you can point to it and say, let's stop for a minute. Give me the five-finger signal about how you think it's going for you in understanding this or mastering that. Most objectives tie back to something bigger we're working on, no matter what the topic is. If we're working now on multiplication for the first time, multiplication ties back to being able to use all the 4 basic arithmetic functions in order to solve real-world problems. If we're working on, if today's language, today's objective is about the invasion of Panama and why it is that, this is more of a high school example now, and why it is that, here we go. Today's lesson is how about the guy who was the president of Panama at the time we invaded. His name was Noriega.
John, are you sharing your screen?
Yeah. Are you sharing a screen with us?
Yes.
We don't have it.
Oh my goodness. What happened there, Jackie?
I'm not sure. Did you already hit share down at the bottom? Whenever you go into your breakout rooms, you're going to stop sharing. So you have to go through the share my screen process again to get back up there.
Oh, okay. Well, glad you stopped me, folks.
It's all to Deb. Deb's credit that she's realizing.
Well, when you said number 4, I thought, okay, either I can't see it or it's me.
Uh-huh.
Also the famous Deb Reed, everyone. She's
oh yeah, the infamous. There we go. I see it now.
All right, very good. So these are the 12 steps I was going through that you
yeah.
Well, this looks good.
The ones in bold came up today. I want to use student-friendly language and then stop to make sure the kids get it. And now I was on number 7 here. Today's lesson is usually part of something bigger. I gave you an example from mathematics. This example here is from social studies. Today's lesson is on money laundering. I'm not trying to prepare my kids to be successful criminals. I'm telling them how Noriega, who was the president of Panama at the time we invaded, did it. But that's part of a larger thing we're going on. So if the essential question is, when should the U.S. interfere in another country's operations? When should we invade and when should we not invade? I'm going to go through a series of country case studies, and this one is the invasion of Panama, And today's lesson is only about money laundering and why we were ticked off at this guy for all the stuff he was doing. So at the beginning of today's lesson, I'll remind the kids of what the bigger picture is that this is part of. So that's what this number 7 is about. And, you know, Tony, and some of your classes, the bigger picture might be about how to keep your body healthy. And that's why today we're working on this particular part of nutrition, or this particular part of stretching muscles. Number 8 here is often referred to as the agenda. Here's the agenda for today. Here are the activities we're going to be doing. And some of you who have been in classes with us at RBT will occasionally say, hey, here's the agenda up here. It's halfway through the morning. How many of you have been looking at it to see if we're keeping pace? And some hands go up, because those are the people who really want to know how, and tend to lose focus if they don't see that this is part of an unfolding sequential whole. Now, this is the one that's particularly interesting. I don't have to say this every day if I'm working on the unit about invading other countries. When is it okay to do it? But at the very beginning, there's a large percentage of kids who want to know why it's worth doing. And it's a habit of mind that is just characteristic of some of us. You know, some of you on this webinar today are people like that. That is to say, if you don't know why something is worth doing, why we're doing it, you either lose interest or tune out or excuse yourself from the room. Would you raise your hand, please, if you're that kind of person? Now I'm going to scroll down and see if I can see the rest. It looks like it's about a third, unless Rose is one of those people and I can't stop the video go up. All right, now that is about what the percentages are thought to be, 25% of any group. If they don't know why they're doing it, or what the reason is why it would be worthwhile, they tune out. So whenever I'm starting something new, whether it's multiplication or, you know, writing with voice, or understanding, deciding whether we should invade another country, if they don't know why that's important, then you lost them. So that's another thing to do in the context of letting kids know what the objectives are. Now, I find these last 3 particularly fascinating. Criteria for success is a topic on which we spend a fair amount of time in our various courses. The short definition of it is, what are the items or the characteristics which will be present in the product or performance of a kid for us to say it's good, for us to say it's mastery, for us to say it's proficient? It's usually a bulleted list. Here are the things that need to be present in your essay. Here are the things that I need to see if I'm going to look at your pictograph in 2nd grade. I need to see a key. I need to see a choice of symbols that represents the count of how many of you like phys ed as opposed to music. I need to see 3 conclusions you reached from looking at how the class poll turned out. If any one of those things is missing, that you need to get that one in there in order for me to say, okay, that's a completed proficient pictograph. So sometime, maybe not in the very first session, because I'm trying to generate interest, I'm going to give them a task to do. And when I define what the criteria for success are in doing the task, that's when the meaning of the objective gets really, really clear. The objective is to be able to produce a product or a performance with these criteria met, the assessment device, in other words. Now, if I do that, I'm going to get the students to self-evaluate along the way how they've done. How many of those criteria do you think you've met so far, Barney? What do you need to do in order to have completed the task up to the criteria? And then, here's the one that I did mention at the beginning. it isn't just enough to say what the objective is, even if you do it in student-friendly language and check for understanding of it, only at the beginning. I want to come back to it during the lesson and during progressive lessons to make sure the kids understand what it is by asking them how it's going or asking them to self-evaluate or something like that. So I would like to open, I don't think we need the chat room because there are not that many of us on. So let me just open the floor to comments you have about these 12 items. There's all kinds of ways you can go. You say, I in the past have particularly paid attention to number 6 or number 8, or I'm wondering what you meant by, you can ask questions about them, or clarification items. So let me open the floor. Don't fall through a hole in it now. Marilla, what do you teach?
I'll leave for a minute.
Oops.
Michelle actually works with me in the cell office. She supports our learning programs. And so she's had a lot of interactions with Deb over the past over the past year, really.
I know.
We have a lot of your BOCES people on, Jackie.
Yeah, I know. It's fascinating.
Wonderful.
I always wonder when I'm thinking about objectives. I think I struggle the most with making sure that they are clear of what I want them to achieve, but also in kid-friendly language. So I know when I've taken Studying Skillful Teacher in the past, and we talked about, understand is not really a part of an objective necessarily, like a strong, verb for an objective. But what other ways can I then, make clear that what I want the students to be able to know and be able to do by the end of the day? Mm-hmm. So, that's, I think, where I struggle the most.
Yeah. Well, where we start in our courses is asking people to use active performance verbs, which you could either see or hear. Students will be able to explain to somebody, blah, 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 blah. Students will be able to separate igneous from metamorphic from sedimentary rocks. So the verb in there is the key to producing a performance you could look at and see, either in something a student would write or an action that a student would do. So you're quite right about understand. That's asking us to see inside students' head and mind read. So active performance verbs means that I have to think through what the objective means enough to come up with the performance that would show me kids had met it. Something that I used to get a lot more than I do now is people say, well, what about discovery learning, John? I mean, what about inquiry learning? You don't want to even tell the kids what the objective is. You want them to discover it. Well, one of the problems with the discovery learning models that were initiated in the 70s, science kits from the Educational Development Corporation, was that the students never knew why they were connecting batteries and bulbs and wires. And, they knew they wanted to get the bulb to light up, but they thought they'd met the objective when they got the bulb to light up. Now, that was not the objective. The objective was to understand how electricity flows in a circuit. And there are two ways to do it. It can flow in series or it can flow in parallel. So the objective would have been to explain why this particular hookup, look, I got it on my desk, I did it, made the light bulb light up. And why it didn't light up when it didn't light up, because there was a gap somewhere in the flow of electricity through the filament of the light bulb. So my response to the question is, yeah, you don't always say the answer in the objective, but you do always say what the purpose of the activity you're doing is. Now, maybe you don't do it in the first 2 minutes. maybe you do something that gets the kids' attention because, look, here's a bottle. There's a balloon blown up on the inside of the bottle. I wonder how the heck that happened. Whoa, what are your speculations, kids? I haven't said the objective yet. They make speculations. I write them down on a chart, blah, 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 time goes by. Then I'll say the objective. Well, at the end of the lesson we're going to do today, you'll be able to understand something about pressure, air pressure, and volume, and therefore why it is that the balloon wound up blown up on the inside of this bottle. You'll be able to explain that. And it has to do with air pressure and volume. Now, I haven't told them the answer, but I have told them what the objective is. So it's the same thing actually with the invading other countries or interfering in the internal affairs of another country. I haven't told them the answer. I said they have to come up with a rationale for why in some cases it is and why in other cases it is not appropriate, that you could use to judge current events. That would be the objective of that. So it's the difference between telling kids an answer as opposed to telling them what they're able to do. And although it doesn't have to come in the opening seconds of a class, it should happen sometime after activities are concluded whose purpose was get them active, get them engaged, get them thinking, get them curious, and then maybe tell them what the objective is.
You think, John, sometimes it happens too with the way people mediate the kinds of questions. You know, I often remember when I first started teaching, we used to send kids to the water table and say, discover water. And they used to discover they could make a big whopping mess. Be water everywhere, right? Yeah. But if I said, go to the water table and be thinking about why some things sink and why some things float, I think just the way you would ask and the mediated of the kinds of questions that we ask, get them to that same place.
Check. Objectives can be embedded in questions.
Yep.
In that case, the objective was students will be able to come up with the variables that determine whether something sinks or floats.
Yep.
That's pretty unfriendly student language.
You know what? I look at number 5 here for me about unpacking, which is something I think I never did in my own teaching for years, which is why I loved that video. But, you know, I've had a wonderful opportunity to be in a lot of your schools through the BOSI system. And I often think you have kids who are so focused and wanting to do it right and getting it done that they're very compliant sometimes. Even when they don't understand why or what they're supposed to be learning, they'll still complete the activity.
Right. Because they're good doobies.
Because they're good kids, really good kids.
Right. All right, we got about 5 minutes left. It's a good time just to settle back for Q&A and open mic. Deborah, I see you've joined us. Anything we can clarify that we did before you got here?
Well, I apologize. I was in another virtual meeting trying to multitask, so I unfortunately missed a good deal of it. I'm sure it was amazing. So I look forward to the recording. So I don't know. I think maybe I work a lot with our elementary teachers, and sometimes the question is, how do I make a valuable learning target that isn't too vague, but is also not too specific? So I see a lot of, I can make character inferences or something like that. It's just a really vague learning target. And how does the student know whether or not they actually met something that is, trying to take a standard and unpack it into student-friendly language, but it also still means something?
Yeah. Well, that's a really good one to explore for a minute. I think that it's a good one because there are multiple levels of sophistication or different levels of depth. At the high end, it would be saying, John, I want you to be able to use the things that a character says or does in order to say things about what kind of a person she is. And show me in the text where they were. Now, that's pretty demanding. Now, we can go down from that to say, tell me what you think the character of Benjamin is like. Well, wait a minute, what kind of a kid is he in the book Incident on Hawks Hill? And the kid says, oh, he's really shy. Who else has some things? Well, he doesn't like to talk to people. And somebody else will say, you know, he loves animals. So we record those things on the board and say, let's look at that chapter we just read where he's in the barn imitating the mouse. What do you think that has to do with what we've said so far? So I'm actually just trying to get kids to name characteristics of a character, and then it becomes a joint activity to justify it. So, I mean, I love that example. It makes me want to think it through. I just gave a low-level one and a high-level one. And what are some of the levels in between that you would say your objective were?
Right.
So that means if I'm having a conversation with you and you're the teacher of this, we are exploring the content together.
Mm-hmm.
And we're inventing, because maybe nobody else in the world had this conversation before, we're inventing the levels of sophistication of what that standard means. And I think that is the untapped topic of PD. You know, we hardly ever do that together as teachers. Let's just talk about the content. Never mind the lesson for 15 minutes. Just what does that standard mean that Deborah just said, and there's 4 or 5 of us around the table. What's your role in your school, Deborah?
I'm the curriculum coordinator for our elementary buildings.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you, and if there's an instructional coach, and for sure, your principal. No, there's just you, huh?
Yes.
Well, that's one of the greatest services you and the principal could serve with teachers. For the principal, if the person is going to do a long observation, just talk about the content for 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And in the context of curriculum coordinator, you could do that too. In fact, there's a video on our website called The Respiratory System, in which...
oh yeah, I've watched that one.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. No, I think that digging into the content is something that we don't spend enough time around. I agree with that. I understand what you're saying. I think particularly with language arts, what's happened is we have become so focused on the standard. The standard is driving the instruction versus the content. And I understand both sides of that, but I think we've gotten a little bit away from really pushing content. You know, you think about all the work around Natalie Wexler and that approach is, but so it's more about, you know, inferencing, and we might spend a lot of time talking about inferencing and how we want kids to make inferences, but it's about the skill versus the content, which I think I'm seeing that in a lot of places now.
Right. Yeah. So the advocates of PLCs touch this, but I think we ought to hit it a little harder, and this will be, I think, my final remark, Jack, because we're at the 5-minute mark before the end. And that is that when teachers who share the same content, like 4th grade or 9th grade algebra, or the other people who teach phys ed in your building, if there are any, Tony, when you share a content, you could plan a lesson together you're all going to teach at some point. And the starting point of that should be exploring the content for 10 or 15 minutes in order to get at the big ideas you want to make sure kids get.
Mm-hmm.
So that should be something you see. If I visit all the PLCs or the common planning time groups in the building, I would love to see that happening sometime.
That would mean I have common planning time with my phys ed teachers.
Oh, yeah.
Are you the only one in the building, Tony?
Which I don't get.
Yeah. Tony, what level are you?
No, there's 4 of us, but we are not allocated common. I
Yeah.
teach elementary and mostly middle school.
Yeah.
We'll play this recording for you.
I'm in a small district,
Good.
so there's one primary elementary. What's that? I didn't hear what you said.
Oh, I think he said to play the recording for your colleagues so that they can all be on the same page about this.
Or your administrators, huh?
We
will be
we
posted.
definitely are. The guys, we are totally on the same page.
Excellent.
It's we are just not given enough time to work together as much as we should be given.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So
Time seems to be a
we make it work.
Yeah.
Well,
That's a theme.
well, we do have to close off, but I just want to thank our partners at Research John and Deb so much for joining us today. And I know that they'll be meeting with us weekly on Tuesdays at 1, as long as we are engaged in this remote learning situation. So I look forward to our next week's session and advertising that. So if you enjoyed today, please join us again next week for more from John and Deb. And please share with your colleagues. This is probably the best, if not the gold standard of teaching work. And being we are in a new realm of education, nothing is more important right now than getting clear on what good teaching looks like and how we can make that happen together. So thank you all. Thank you, John. Thank you, Deb.
Thank you.
You all. It was great.
Keep
All
the
the-
light shining that light,
Thank you.
folks.
Thank you. Please stick around. We do have George Koros up next in the same meeting room. So I'm just going to keep this meeting room open, and you're welcome to join us and stay with us. And that's all I have for you at this moment. I'm just going to go let George in so that he can.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.